We want strong conservative election policy. We want a business environment in the state of Indiana that continues to grow on our strengths. I think that is how you should say, did Max Engling do his job as Secretary of State?
I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate.
I don't think that it is asking too much for Republicans to pick their own candidates. What the Democrats want to do on election policy, it's vastly different than what the Republicans want. When I look at the other candidates in this race, how do you address these concerns? We have heard nothing.
Really?
That's not how the world works. Tell us what you actually believe.
Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Max Engling, the Republican nominee for Indiana Secretary of State. In part 1, we talked about your family, your faith, your education, and experiences that shaped who you are coming into this race. And now I want to turn and look at the office itself, the roles, the responsibilities, what the office is, and what you want the office to be. So let's jump right in. You initially built much of your career behind the scenes. You were a staffer, you were a campaign worker. How did you first originally enter professional politics as a career choice, and what did you originally imagine your role in this arena would be?
Yeah, so I'll take even one step further back maybe, that I've worked for a number of small businesses here in Indiana.
Okay.
I worked all through school when I went to school at IUPUI, started at Ivy Tech, then finished at IUPUI. And part of that was being one of 8 kids, and so you got to pay your own way through it. But graduated, worked for a small business for a couple of years, and then when I saw, and it helped a lot of folks on campaigns during that time too. During school, I was college Republicans vice chair and all of that, but VP. But when I saw what was happening with the Obama administration in that 2008, 10, 11 timeframe, it really felt to me like, Max, are you the one that's going crazy?
Yeah.
Because the whole world is saying, no, we want to go, hope and change. Everyone's moving in that direction. And I was thinking to myself, no, this isn't where I want us to go. And when in that midterm cycle, the House flipped and Republicans sent, I believe, a record number of new members to Washington, D.C. to go push back on that administration and say, no, we really want conservative policy. And that's the main focus here. That's when I said, well, this could be more than interning or volunteering or working a campaign, which I had done. It could be, let's set real policy. And so I didn't know anyone, but I went out to DC and knocked on doors, handed out my resume, and I ended up getting a job and working for the Chief Elections Committee in the U.S. House, so the Committee on House Administration. And so had an awesome opportunity to really lean into that side of it. Now, the committee does a lot of internally focused work. It's not one that a lot of people pay very close attention to in DC, but has a lot of vital roles. And so one of those is overseeing elections. And both the House and the Senate constitutionally oversee elections on their own. And so there's an opportunity to look across the entire country and say which races are going to be close or contested or where we may have challenges, and then build a team to be deployed there on that front. So that was the first time when I said, okay, I've been involved in politics for a long time, but how do I get involved in policy, in shaping the future of that? And then had other great experiences in DC that we can talk about as far as opportunities to learn and work through before we moved home. But I think that was the first time I said, let's actually go do something meaningful with the background that I have. Yeah.
How old were you at that point?
So I was 24.
Okay. Okay. What's something that you, looking back, totally misunderstood before you stepped into it?
That's a good question. Well, I think when you look at especially the higher levels of government, you kind of have this assumption that everybody there knows exactly what's happening and that they're going to solve all of the world's problems, or at least you hope that they can. But when you really get in the mix, what you find is a lot of people that are just either really smart or they want to work really hard, but maybe they don't have all the answers. And so you have a team of people that is inputting different pieces to the puzzle to say, how do we get to the best possible outcome here? And I think when you see that up close, I think it's maybe a little bit different than how I thought it worked. It's not just, you've got a staffer who handles this, they take care of the problem. You've got a staffer who handles this, they solve that problem. You work with the elected leaders and bring an idea and they solve it from that side. It really is a whole big function of people inputting good information to help solve problems. And I am also careful to make it clear, the government doesn't solve all the problems, right? The issues in their sphere of influence, I think it's important to have those, a lot of different perspectives.
You worked on a lot of campaigns. You, on the elections committee, you saw a lot of campaigns from a sort of bird's eye view. When considering running for elected office, right, when you consider somebody running for elected office, what makes the difference between someone who is effective and ineffective, successful and unsuccessful?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. There's one, what makes you successful on a campaign, and then what makes you successful in the office that you're seeking. And there's a lot of overlap there, but what I've found, and part of this is because I've experienced it from the other side, even before jumping into this, is that one, you really just have to want it on the campaign side. Like, you have to really want the position because it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to work long hours. It's hard. You have to ask people for support that is sometimes challenging. And if you don't really want it, if you don't have that fire, then you're probably not going to get it. And I've seen races across the country where folks have support. They've got people, lining up to say, hey, let's really push. And then a candidate that maybe doesn't match that intensity. And a lot of times that is either frustrating or you won't get across the finish line. And so, having seen that before, I am very dedicated to, I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure that we get across the finish line here, so that we can implement good policy. And so part of it is that on the campaign side, and then when you transition to, okay, let's say you win your office that you're running for, how do you do the official side of that really well? And a lot of it is the same as far as intensity is concerned, as far as dedication to working hard, but it's also the ability to build a coalition around an idea. And you have to be able to take a whole bunch of different pieces of the puzzle, figure out how they go together so that you can move forward as a group. Now, a lot of that happens legislatively, but it also happens from an office like the Secretary of State, who needs to champion a priority and work directly with the State House to accomplish those things. And so, having been involved in that for a lot of my career, I think it is very helpful in this role to be able to get priorities across the finish line if the voters give me this responsibility.
Yeah, so you've worked on a lot of teams for working with the House, looking at legislation, working with teams. You've led, you've been like senior staff at times. Talk to me about how your career so far has prepared you specifically to lead a team like we see in the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah, and I think it is one thing that sets me apart from other candidates in this race too, is that I have direct, relevant experience for this role. Whether that's on the small business side, like I mentioned, working for several small businesses here in Indiana, or one that is less of a small business and more of a family-owned business, but I worked for Beck's Hybrids as well, and outstanding company, great conservative values that we talked about in the first part of this conversation. But whether it's the small business side, also I've filed my own small business in the Secretary of State's office, so seeing that part right up close and personal, and part of that is, I'm feeding a family of 6 right now, right here in the state of Indiana, and that, whether it's the small business side or whether it's the pressures of how do you support a family side, it changes your perspective on a lot of things. And I think that really makes you want the office to run in a way where our business owners here in Indiana are not thinking, how do I get through the red tape at the State House? It's instead you're thinking, how do I employ more Hoosiers? How do I get good people to be able to support their families? And I will say the business registration division in the office, I think it is pretty straightforward on the front end to make sure you can register a business quickly, easily, efficiently. I think there's some things that we could do secondarily to that as
Okay.
you're updating information to make it run smoother, but we can talk about that in the future. So one, small business experience. I think two, elections experience. So not only have I worked on the side that's setting election policy and looking at big picture across the country, but also it's getting into the weeds when you're sending and deploying teams out to races across the state to actually watch, to look at contested elections, to potentially recount as well. But then also having just served locally as an inspector in a couple of precincts where your job is to make sure that the immediacy of the election on the election day is run well in a bipartisan fashion and in a way that gives voters confidence that their vote is going to count. And so having some of that direct experience as well on the election side. And then finally, legislatively, like we've talked about, when you have priorities for an office, if you're just yelling priorities into the void, it won't matter.
True.
And so not only am I prepared to work from my background with the legislature, but we're also already working with the legislature. I've had good conversations with the chairman of a number of committees that are directly working with the Secretary of State's office, including the Elections Committee in both chambers. And so, and I am thankful that the State House has made it a priority over the years to grow the strength of our elections, defend the integrity of our elections. That's really important. But with somebody that has both a background in legislative work and is actively currently working with them to make sure we can get our priorities across the finish line. I think you combine all of that, and you're really looking at a candidate that has the best experience, actual experience, to lead this office.
Yeah. So it's not just a future role for you; it's a role that you're already practicing aspects of in the past and then even currently as you're running for.
That is correct.
Okay. Tell me more about small business is vital to the state of Indiana. It's a huge sector. Tell me more about your experience. Tell me about how the government misunderstands or hasn't served small business the best it could and how it can do better.
Yeah. So on the small business side, when I worked through college, I worked for a construction company.
Okay.
We actually, the main project that I was working on was the extension onto the Community North Hospital in Indianapolis. And it was a good experience. I worked a lot because I needed as much money as I could get to pay for school. But then when I graduated, I worked for an HVAC company where I was an office manager and then sometimes would do kind of sales representative work as well. But really what you see in the day-to-day is that oftentimes you're running on a pretty thin margin, that you don't have a whole lot of staff that can be dedicated to, employees dedicated to working out the consequences of government policy. And so as easy as the government can make that to say, yes, we do need some responsible regulation, that's a part of government's role, but we don't need to be over-regulated. You don't have to, that's where the red tape and burdensome regulation come in. As much as you can pull that out is important. And I am thankful to the state of Indiana for making a lot of progress down that road at the state level. And I am also thankful for when you see, the president, both in his first term and then again now in his second term, has made it a priority to say, while we do need responsible regulation, if anyone across the federal government, and I know this is higher than we're talking about now, but anyone across the federal government wants to implement a new regulation, you have the responsibility to retract. It was, I think, 2 originally in his first term and 10 now, regulations that are considered burdensome. So you really have to think, is this something that will help business owners? Is this something that will help energy production or whatever the case may be? So I think the key is that when you're in an office like the Secretary of State's office, is that you're thinking of the business owner first. How do we make sure they can be successful? Because if they're successful, the state is successful.
Is there an example of some red tape or regulation that you found to be burdensome and you would be for removing?
Well, I think kind of the biggest thing that I would point to is if you're submitting information to the Secretary of State's office or to any statewide government, having the back-end technology talk more closely behind the scenes so that you're not inputting information repetitively in different places across state government. I think that would be important to make sure that you're spending less time on how do you stay in compliance and more time on how do you do the work that you're setting out to do. So I'd say that's one of the pieces that I would put out there, and really just thinking through every new initiative to make sure you're prioritizing the business owner.
Okay. We talked a little bit about it in the first part of the conversation, but tell me about, there's so much that leads up to the decision to run for Secretary of State, right? It's a big choice. Tell me what ultimately convinced you to say yes, to run for this office, that you had to do it.
Yeah, so, we mentioned in the first part of this that a lot of people were coming to me directly, whether that was delegates or other folks asking if I would consider running for this office. And while I rebuffed them for a while, part of that is because my career in both politics and policy has largely been pushing other people. So how can I be supportive to help a good candidate get across the finish line, or how can I be supportive on the policy side to make sure that we're getting good things across the finish line and implemented into law. And so I'd say that's where I'm very comfortable. But when I recognized through other folks bringing this to me that there was an opportunity for me to step into a role where there was a void, where I could make a difference, and in a position and in a state where I want to do really good things. I want the state to grow well. I want the state to continue in their strong conservative path forward. I think that's when I said, along with my wife, as we prayed through the opportunity, it's like, okay, this is really an opportunity where you can do something well, and it's a position where you're kind of uniquely qualified to do something well here. And so then, if you want it to be done well, then you have to step up and go do it if that's what you truly believe. And so that's how we jumped into this race kind of together, my wife and I, praying that through and taking the next step forward.
Yeah. You jumped into the race a little bit later than is typical, than is standard. Tell me about, you had a much shorter time to make your case to the delegates. First, maybe to our listeners, explain the process of electing the nominee on the Republican side for Secretary of State. And then tell me, in your experience, what was that very short amount of time like? What happened behind the scenes?
Yeah, so you're right, it is unique compared to other elected offices where a few of the statewides are elected via convention. And so not a primary that we would see for most of our offices here in the state of Indiana. So what that means is that roughly 1,800 Republican delegates and I believe 2,500 some odd on the Democratic side each select their own candidates to run statewide for these offices. So
how are those delegates selected?
So the delegates are elected largely. So you run in a primary.
Okay. So the delegates run in the primary. Okay.
That's right, to be selected for this role. There are a certain number of them that are appointed. And then also if somebody wins a role and cannot fulfill that for family obligations or otherwise, they can have someone appointed in that position. And so they will then run for that, win, and then move forward into the convention. And the statewide offices, so this year the comptroller, Elise Nishala on the Republican side, the treasurer, Daniel Elliott, and the Secretary of State, they each go to the convention to petition the delegates why they should be selected to move into the general election. Now, obviously, the only time that you're petitioning the delegates is not simply at the convention. So
that would be a very short amount of time. You had more than that.
You have 30 days, up until 30 days before convention to file if you want to run for that. So I filed prior to that deadline and had truly a sprint around the state to talk with delegates, to travel the state, to get in front of these folks to say, hey, here's the vision that I'm setting for the office, here's where we want to go, and then here's also how we can get across the finish line in November to make sure that not only do we have good policy vision, but also that we can win to go implement it. And so it's true that both you're not winning for the sake of winning, but it's also true that you can have great policy, and if you can't win, then you won't be able to get that across the finish line. So pressed through the convention. It was a sprint. I was extremely thankful for the support that I had from Senator Banks, from Attorney General Rokita, from Treasurer Daniel Elliott, from a lot of folks across the legislature that were very involved. My chairman was Andrew Ireland, and I think having all of that support really helped press. But delegates know, and delegates truly understand, each individual candidate needs to tell them why you are the best candidate to run the office, and it is their decision at the convention to make sure that you can. They understand why you'd be best and want to pull the lever for you. So, quick run, but very thankful to leave the convention unified. It happened in 2 votes. I think we had to coalesce around one candidate and move forward together. And I've felt that now moving into the general, that we're pressing forward as a Republican Party to go win.
How do you think, what do you think the main message was that ultimately convinced the Republican delegates to rally around you as the man to lead the top of the ticket for the Republican Party?
I think it was a combination of both policy that we were pressing for, kind of policy, and the background to then implement that policy, probably shared equally with how do you have the infrastructure to then go run in the general and win. Yeah. So I think delegates, as the heartbeat of the Republican Party, most closely aligned to what's happening in the Republican Party, very clearly understand you have to have a good vision and you have to be able to bring that to fruition in the general election.
Yeah, that's true. So when most people, some people don't know what the Secretary of State does. So when many people think about the Secretary of State's office, they think elections, and that's a huge part of the role. It also covers a lot of other areas around the state. Explain to me what the Secretary of State does.
Yeah, so you're right. As the Chief Elections Officer in the state, it is a huge part of what the Secretary of State does, is ensuring that from the state level that you are running strong elections. And what that means often is that you are working closely with your clerks who are administering the elections at the county level, and having strong relationships there, because if you don't have a strong relationship there, it's going to impact how those elections are run across the state.
Run me through a bit of, explain the hierarchy of the lowest officers to where you are at the top of the chain as far as administering and overseeing elections.
Yeah, so Secretary of State, you have an elections division. There's bipartisan staff on both sides. Okay. And they work directly with the clerks to say, how do we actually administer good elections at the county level? But then there's also the Elections Commission, and the Elections Commission is also bipartisan, and those folks handle a lot of, whether it's a conflict that comes up or you need to resolve something, they'll resolve that at the commission level. Okay. But it's largely a bipartisan operation once you get into the division side. And then, but you're right, it's not just elections. It's also the Business Registration Division, which we had some discussion on. Every small business that wants to start in Indiana has to go through the Business Registration Division in order to do that. But it's also the securities regulation, so Securities Division. So if you are a broker-dealer, or if you are a financial advisor, any number of folks that deal with securities in the state of Indiana, you're registered there. You also get your training and education there. So any regulation that comes from the state of Indiana goes through that division. And then also the dealers division. So auto dealers, auto manufacturers, the dealers, and that relationship runs through that division, where you're making sure that there is a fair playing field for both sides as they work to ensure that they can sell vehicles here in the state of Indiana, and to do that well. So much of it is just making sure that you are a good arbiter, but also these divisions are divisions that are put in place specifically to make sure that folks like you and I are not defrauded, right? Yeah. Whether it's security side or whether it's auto dealer's side and the manufacturer's side, making sure that it's a consumer protection function. Yeah. So you really are called to do that with very, very high integrity.
Tell me more about the team in the office that you're directly overseeing in your role day to day. What does that look like?
So there is the team in Office 201. It's the kind of core team that works directly with the Secretary of State and not necessarily part of any of the divisions.
Okay.
Although I would say, there's a little bit of like the HR and kind of administrative part of the office. You could probably call that maybe almost its own division. But really, you've got a chief of staff. You could hire a deputy chief if you wanted. You've got your general counsel. You have other folks that advise you. And then you have kind of your administrative team, the direct administrative team in that front office. And the role is to make sure that you have eyes on everything that's happening. And then there's division leads, obviously, that are extremely important to making sure that every division is operating
and do
as
they all
should
report
and
to you?
report back up. Correct.
Okay, so they all report to you. So that's something that your previous experience, you have experience leading teams in that regard?
And I will say one thing too. While there's a lot of direct reports, they're not all hired by the Secretary of State, especially in the elections division. Some are appointed by the governor too. So I think that's a kind of a unique part of the office. But yes, I've run divisions before. When I worked in Washington, D.C. a couple different times where they haven't been quite the same size as the Secretary of State's office. I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, but I think it is important when you're running a division that the person who the voters sent there, whose name is on the door, they cast the vision for the office, and then your job in your division is to run that really well. You take that and you say, we're going to execute on our duties and make sure that everything is implemented exactly. And I think that translates no matter the size of the division. It is a matter of, do you have the ability to run something precisely?
Yeah. Let's talk about the policies. One, that the Republican Party supported you going into the nomination for. And then second, that you're running on currently over the whole state of Indiana. What are the core policies that you are advocating for that Indiana needs?
Yeah, and I would combine those things, right? What you run on in the convention and in the general election. So number one, it's defending our election integrity, right? And so that's ensuring that only citizens are voting in our elections. That is, whether it's folks that are here illegally that should not be voting, or whether it's folks that are here legally but are not citizens and therefore ineligible to vote, making sure that we're more proactive to ensure that they're not either registering or voting. And then also, strict maintenance of voter rolls. Our voter rolls are bloated to a degree, so making sure that we are very continually and actively taking folks that are have moved or are not eligible to vote, off of the voter rolls. I think it's also transparency. It's we want to put forward a transparency portal for elections, eyes on elections, so that if somebody at the county level sees something that is improper or that they think is improper, you don't have to do the full fleshing out of that. That's part of the point of this, is to say you can have direct access to the Secretary of State's office to send that information up so it can be reviewed, whether that's a fraudulent situation or whether it's just a conflict of interest somewhere, or maybe it's not easily reported. And then I think we've talked quite a bit about two more things. One is closing the primaries so that Republicans pick their own candidates, and there's not crossover voting between parties, and that Democrats do the same thing. It's just as much of a strength for folks that are voting on the Democratic side to make sure that they put forward their best candidates, and Republicans do the same. And then in the general election, you select who best represents that district. And then the final piece that I'd throw out here is around the business registration division with these, really any filing fraud. But where we've seen it most show up recently is with trucking companies that are operating illegitimately, and they're filing an LLC at the business registration division. The drivers that are being employed by that LLC either have CDLs that are maybe coming from a state where they don't check if you are here legally, or if your English proficiency is up to standard, or if you are operating on the road improperly, maybe you're pulling too heavy of a load in your truck or something like that. And then as these violations happen, if it gets to be enough where they're penalized for it, then they'll dissolve the LLC, start again.
Wow.
build an identical one, register it in the Secretary of State's office, and continue to move forward. And so
And they can just do that over and over again.
correct. It's sort of a shell company
Wow. Yeah.
situation. So what happens is you have dangerous drivers on the road with Hoosiers. We've seen where the folks have been either seriously injured or killed on our roads just in the last year many times.
Yeah.
And so I'm thankful at the presidential level, the president has put forward an executive order along with being implemented by Secretary Duffy. At the state level, or at the federal level, but from our state representatives with Senator Banks, he has put forward Delilah's Law to make sure that there's English proficiency, that only folks that are here legally have CDLs. But then also at the state level too, the State House, Governor Braun, Attorney General Rokita have all made this a point of emphasis to make sure that they're focusing there. But that leaves a gap in the Secretary of State's office where as these businesses are registered, they're not, we need to compile the data to say, okay, if we have 14 identical LLCs at one home address, there's probably an issue there. And so let's go right from the front door, compiling that data and then working with the Attorney General and other folks to further investigate and prosecute.
I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate as far as those first two policies. What would you say to someone who's concerned with your policy on, you said election integrity, specifically with illegals voting or non-citizens voting? I've heard the counterpoint to that is it's essentially a non-issue, right? There are virtually no cases of that happening. It can be made broadly, but specifically in talking about Indiana, what would you say to someone who has that concern?
Yeah, I've heard that before too, and I think number one, we saw recently in the address from the president that this is happening across the country. We have also seen in a report from the state of Indiana previously that there are folks that have registered to vote and they're here illegally, and have voted and they're here illegally. And so number one, I would say it's not a non-issue. If you have somebody that is voting in an election and they're not eligible to vote in that election, even one ineligible voter is too many, in my opinion. You have to have that sanctity of the elections. Otherwise, you will not be a good administrator of elections in the state of Indiana. So that's number one. But I would also say I'm thankful for the state of Indiana making it a priority and pushing us further towards the strongest elections that we can have. But I also believe we need to continue that and be more proactive on that front. And, you know, when I look at the other candidates in this race, we have pressed to say, how do you address these concerns? Is an ineligible, someone who should not be here voting, whether they're here illegally or just not eligible as a non-citizen, how would you address that? And we have heard nothing.
Really?
And part of that is because on the other side, if you look at what the Democrats want to do on election policy, it's vastly different than what the Republicans want on election policy. And I'm going to give you one example, and this may be too in the weeds, but
go for it.
So on the Republican side, we've put forward the Save America Act, right?
Yep.
So it's voter identification, it's only citizens voting in our elections, there's a private right of action in there, and I'm thankful that if that was passed, which we're pushing for very strongly, that our federal counterparts would pass that, it would not affect the state of Indiana immensely because they've done a good job of implementing a lot of that already. It would very much affect a lot of states across the country, though. And when the Democrats put forward election policy, whether that's directly with my candidates or their alignment with their party, or my opponents, or their alignment with their party, it's things like the For the People Act in Washington that they put forward as their top priority when they were in charge last, and that is a federalization of elections that takes away the authority of the states to run their elections and instead centralizes it in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
That is a huge problem.
That's a big difference.
It is a big difference.
Very polarizing.
And I think it's also something where, we can see that the Democrats or those abetting them, like other candidates in this race, want to control power more than they want to have strong, secure elections.
Yeah.
And to me, that is a fundamental difference. And it's also something that the people here in Indiana recognize, and they don't want to move in that direction.
Okay. And so that's broadly. Specifically, within each party, you've advocated for closed primaries. That would be you register with the party, and then you only get to vote for candidates in that party. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. The counter argument to that I've heard from some people that I've spoken to, and then also your opponent, is that breeds extremity. That breeds further division. And the ideal scenario is that people aren't forced to decide between a party. So what would you say to that, and what does somebody do in that situation?
So I would take one step back and say there are 15 states around the country that have closed primaries, an additional 16 that are semi-closed. It's something that is regular order in most of the states around the country. We would be the outlier to that here in Indiana. And we've also seen states with very high voter turnout that have closed primaries. It's an area that the state of Indiana we need to grow in, is having more people turn out to vote. And so, one, I don't think that it is asking too much for Republicans to pick their own candidates. And the same thing for the Democrats. And the way it works is that prior to a deadline before a primary, you wouldn't re-register to vote. You would simply say, I am a Republican, and make that determination. And then instead of picking right when you got into the polling place what you were on the poll pad, it would already have been, you would have done the same thing but prior.
Okay.
And so Republicans and Democrats. And so I think there's a lot of folks making it to be something bigger than it is from a voter participation perspective, because you're taking the same actions but further back so that you can't think, how would I cross over to potentially influence the other side's elections? So I think it does also help people to, I think, get out and vote more, because oftentimes you could run into an apathetic voter who thinks it almost doesn't matter what I do or who I pick, because there's lots of competing interests even in my own primaries. So I think it's important to make sure that we do that from that perspective.
Where do independents fall in that category? How would they go about this?
So there's a couple different ways. In a truly closed primary, they would be able to vote in the general election and say, how do I want to move forward? Partly because it is our voting system is a club-based system. And so if you don't want to pick a club, then that's okay. But you also then don't choose from that club's perspective. If you don't agree with them enough to be part of them, you probably shouldn't pick that person going forward. But there are also what's called a semi-closed primary, and that's where if you want to run for an office, you select one of the parties on the ballot. But if you are simply voting, you want to be an independent, you could select either one, even at the point of voting. So as you build that coalition, I'm advocating that as you build that coalition, certainly you can have those conversations to figure out what makes the most sense for the state of Indiana. Maybe it's a two-step process, but I think it is important to continue moving towards the closed primaries. That's right.
Okay. So you'll if you win, you'll start in January. Is that right? 1 year down the road, 4 years down the road, how are the voters to measure your success if they vote you in?
So one is, are we doing the main things that we're standing for, which is that we are building the strength and integrity of our elections here in Indiana, and then two, that we're defending our shared conservative values. So if those two things are happening, if we're moving in the forward and we're moving in a more conservative direction, I think that is how you should say, did Max Engling do his job as Secretary of State? Okay.
I want you to take a moment and tell me about how you perceive the field going into November and what you see your path to victory as.
So the biggest thing is that we are a conservative state, and Hoosiers understand what's happening here. And when I get my message out to say we want strong conservative election policy, we want a business environment in the state of Indiana that continues to grow on our strengths, Hoosiers want that. We move forward. On the other side, we have a candidate, a Democratic candidate, that is not taking policy stances, that is simply just saying that they want to run in a middle ground, which we know is not the case. We've seen that in many races around the country where folks won't claim their party and on the other side, and they'll just say, I want to do good things for everybody. Well, that's not how the world works. Tell us what you actually believe. And when those things actually come out, Hoosiers know that isn't the direction we want to go in.
Yeah.
For example, the backdrop of my Democratic opponent being selected at his convention was the Los Angeles mayor's race. A week later, they were still counting votes.
Wow.
And the person that was in third place on election night was now being pushed into the final two in a jungle primary, moving into the general election, because they had counted votes for an additional week afterward. It was a good example of saying, what do the Democrats want to do when they're in control? And then while they were picking their nominee. Yeah. Hoosiers don't want that. But then also, it's looking at a third-party candidate who has said directly that his only goal is to create a new party, which will influence how Hoosiers can move forward with conservative policy. They don't want to see a party that's only goal by their candidate is to create a challenge for folks that want more conservative priorities passed. And so both of them, and I think the third-party candidate is listening to his advisors who are Democrats and are pulling them further to the left. And so I think when the message gets out there of good conservative policy on one side and Democratic policy on the other side that doesn't look out for Hoosiers, I think we're making strong headway.
Okay, that's a great case, and I'm glad you're able to make it today. I want to ask one final question. When you think about the future of Indiana, right? We've talked about the voters and how they will judge your success. Mm-hmm. I want you to think about your children and the Indiana they will inherit years from now when they're grown and they inherit this state as their own, and they're in positions to influence its direction. When they look back at how you raised them, how you led them, and then also how you led in this state, what do you want them to understand about their father and why he did that?
I think I want them to grow up with the understanding that I approach this with biblical values, that there's personal responsibility, that when they take personal responsibility, they can thrive, and that when they grow up in a state that rewards you for working hard, I think those are the things that I would put forward as, did we press the state in the right direction? And I'm hopeful for that. It's also the reason that I'm here now, so that we can continue building on the bedrock here in Indiana to make sure that we push the state in the best direction possible.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the BallotCast and engaging in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Both with me and with the voters in all of Indiana. So thank you, Mr. Max Engling, for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thank you, Gavin. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn more about Max and what he stands for, head on over to maxforindiana.com. You'll see everything we talked about today and more of what he's looking to bring to the Secretary of State's office in our beautiful state of Indiana. On a separate note, if you enjoyed this conversation, if you want to know more about what we're doing, go ahead and follow us, the BallotCast, at the BallotCast Official on Instagram and the BallotCast on Facebook. We're going to start conversations one at a time on a personal level right here in Southern Indiana and across the state. So stay tuned and refer us to your friends and neighbors so that we can all be more informed heading up to this crucial election in our state. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.